And I am delighted to welcome Angela Duffy from the NDRC and David Hunt from Cainthus. If you guys would like to share your or turn on your cameras and your microphones so that you'll be able to have your chat there. Do we have Angela as well?
I have sound, but I can't turn on my video. I think the host has control of me, so I leave it to whoever's hosting.
Perfect. I think Deirdre has hosting, so I'll get Deirdre to activate your camera. And David, I can see that we have you. So just a huge welcome to both of you, and I'm very much looking forward to there we are. We have Angela now. Super stuff. So welcome. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And hi, David. How are you? Thanks very much for joining us here. So I suppose I've been working with probably quite a few digital startups. I'm working with people out of the Southeast for a number of years now. And, you know, I have seen a lot of good ag tech businesses starting out of Ireland. And, you know, looking at where they can go in terms of the applicability globally. And I thought of David and his story. So, you know, we have different landscapes in terms of agriculture in different parts of the world. We're very much a grass-fed nation, as is New Zealand and parts of France, etc. But it is different in different parts of the world. And I think that global view might come from you, David. So you are a Mayo man, unfortunately. And, you know, you are now based out of the beautiful Cong, and I'm very jealous of that. So tell me a little bit about your background, because you've come from a farming background and a business background as well.
Yeah, well, perhaps not quite a farming background, but I started my career as a corporate banker, and my family business would be Comex McKinnon, which is Ireland's largest grain trading company, and I was managing director of that business for a number of years before I left to start what ultimately became Cainthus, which was in around 2014. And then the other sort of slightly odd one is that I'm also involved with a place in San Francisco called Singularity University, where I'm one of their main speakers on the interactions of technology and agriculture. And I principally talk about global agricultural systems and what they start to look like as we see more digitalization. And covering such topics as, so for example, if we start seeing a lot of cellular-based meat, what does that do on a global systematic basis, as opposed to looking at it in isolation?
So you've seen quite a few different things, and I think it was a trip to the US in the first place that sort of sent your mind thinking about the revolution in agriculture. And how did you come to, I suppose, computer vision and where you're at now? Maybe people aren't so familiar with Cainthus, so you can give them a little bit of background on maybe the customer that you're targeting and the needs that those customers have.
Yeah, so just to explain how I got into this, I was the managing director at Comex back in 2013. And while there, I basically saw that a whole lot of the global agricultural problems fundamentally stem back to a lack of empirically valid measures to the average farmer with which to make better decisions. Like, we didn't know what or where we needed to improve because we didn't have enough information to actually know to make a good decision. So I went to Singularity University for the first time in 2013, thinking that this was an unsolvable problem in my lifetime. And I got exposed to a lot of bleeding edge technologies at that point in time. And computer vision really caught my eye because I could see that imaging sensors were decreasing in cost and increasing in quality at exponential rate of improvement. And I could also see that the graphical processing units that you needed to process raw imagery, they were also improving in quality while decreasing in cost as an exponential rate. So the fundamental concept that became Cainthus was, hang on a minute, if you get cheap imaging sensors and cheap processors and do what I now know was prohibitively expensive software development to turn them into universal measurement devices, you could actually create a system that would be affordable to the average farmer, that would enable them to improve their understanding of the environment within which they are operating and consequently make better decisions. So upon the realization of that, it was like, right, global agriculture is getting digitalized just like every other industry, and computer vision is probably going to be the most cost-effective way to universally apply this to agriculture. We initially started out in crops, and that was largely because my agricultural background was mostly crops rather than livestock. But one of the other company founders, Robin Johnston, his father, Jay Johnston, was one of North America's leading dairy nutritionists. So a lot of our understanding of dairy and livestock came from Robin and his father. And we focused on dairy principally because it had the best unit economics with which to apply technology to, and it also had very good adoption rates of technology. So after very many painful years of fumbling around, working out what was the best cost benefit and business model with which to make offerings to farmers, we are now selling at sort of large scale commercial farm level computer vision system where a farmer installs cameras and a Connect compute node in their barn. And that today, that will give them back information principally on feed bunk management, tells them how much feed is available to the animals, whether the push-ups are happening on time, whether the deliveries are happening on time, whether the bunk cleanouts are happening as scheduled, and alerting the farmers if any discrepancies or if there's any low feed. In September, we should be rolling out our animal behavioral module, which will be basically giving you a 24-hour time budget of what all of the animals are doing. So we'll be giving behavioral feedback information to the farmers. And the principal customer we're servicing is dairy farmers with a minimum of 2,000 cows in indoor environments.
So that's interesting. So I'm going to sum up all your wonderful language and say you're a big brother for the cows in an indoor situation. So that I thought was quite interesting. So when you look out there, is there really, because of a large need, and it was alluded to in the earlier presentations as well, you know, huge demand because of increasing population and increasing nutritional needs. Is there a change in the way that people are farming out there? We see it even in Ireland. I'm from a small farm, and you know, my brother went to agricultural college, but we're always going to have a small farm unless we buy more or amalgamate. So how different is the situation here to what you're seeing and applying, and where you're applying some of this know-how?
It's actually funny, you can increasingly see quite a lot of Irish dairy farming starting to learn from that more sort of intensified scale operations that we're seeing in other parts of the world. And the amount of Irish people you meet working on those large scale global dairies is quite amusing. We do travel well. But effectively what you're dealing with, the global average milk yield is about 2,400 kilograms of milk per animal per year. The yield of an intensive dairy system in California is 10,500 liters, is 10,500 kilograms of milk per animal per year. And Ireland, I think, and feel free to correct me, someone on the line, I think is about 7,000 liters per animal per year or something like that. So effectively, in terms of like emissions and environmental footprint and profitability, the more efficient your production model is, the better all of those things are. So you have disproportionately less emissions and land use from a high yielding animal than you do from a lower yielding animal. And we have a blog on our company webpage at the moment where we basically worked out that if you got all dairy animals in global production performing at the same level that US dairy cows are performing at, you could reduce the global herd number from 268 million cows to 69 million cows while still having the same volume of milk being produced. So technologies like ours, where we're looking at efficiency, where we're looking at feeding efficiency, and also validating the welfare that by analyzing the animal's behavior to validate welfare and all this sort of thing, we're basically trying to create a scenario where you can maximize cow productivity without sacrificing the animal's welfare, and making that a replicable model that could be applied to any country in the world. It's somewhat ambitious, but the numbers are quite impressive once you start digging into them.
So effectively watching and ensuring that feed is maybe as scheduled and nutrition is as planned, and if not, intervening. So does your system then provide data information and alerts to allow people to adjust, and how does that happen?
Correct, providing alerts and when things are happening on time, and making sure that if something goes wrong that the farmer knows about it immediately. And again, bringing that back to like sort of Irish operations, we're increasingly in Ireland, I'm starting to see cows are starting to move indoors a bit more than they used to be. And I've been to a number of Irish dairies where they're cutting the grass, delivering it to the cows, and then the cows are being milked on a voluntary basis by milking robots rather than being moved into parlor systems. So again, that's where you're sort of seeing smaller scale Irish farming beginning to adopt some of the things that we've seen at the larger scale dairies in places like California.
When you mention unit economics and the farmer then thinking about, you know, the cost received, the price received for milk, costs involved, how is something like this, I suppose, you know, benefiting or changing those unit economics? Do you provide that story to a farmer? So what was the analysis that you did, or what was the testing, I suppose, that you did of the system?
I will politely say we found that out the hard way. There was a point in time in Cainthus where we had done proof of concepts of a whole range of different things that we could offer the farmer. And the first, I have no problem saying at this point that the first commercial system we were out there selling was a bit of a disaster, because we were giving the farmer kind of a bit of everything on an individual animal. And that led to, like, the data was overwhelming. Some farmers valued some things, some farmers valued other things, and it was all expensive. So the initial commercial rollout we did in 2018 was not very good. So we basically said, right, we need to focus, we need to strip all of this back and focus on a single unit economic cost benefit argument that any farmer in our target dairy of 2,000 cow plus indoor operations can understand, make sense of, and see the value of. So when we started looking at all of the things that we could do, the feed bunk management aspects and the animal behavioral aspects probably the most sense to offer to farmers initially. So basically, the feed bunk management works well on a unit economic basis because two of the largest costs in any dairy at that scale are labor and feed. So if you can provide a digital tool that reduces labor usage while also increasing feed efficiency, then you've hit the two single biggest costs that the dairy has. So that was why, based on all of the various things we'd done over the years, feed bunk management ended up being the thing that was the first sort of commercially scalable product that we've launched, that we're successfully installing and receiving revenue for.
So in my world, you know, working with the startups pretty early, and you know, the first piece is to really understand the customer. Many of them come from the background that they're trying to address a problem in. And I guess, you know, doing that customer discovery piece, how did you start early days? So we talked about in the beginning, you know, you learned about, I suppose, technology, you had some economic background. And then with the partner, Robin, you know, working on what was important to the farmers, and, you know, where was the gap then between that and, I suppose, 2018, pushing something out, because, you know, fail fast and often can be a great path. And, you know, working in that way, I did that in medtech, so producing some prototype and pushing it out as well. So How can you compare or talk about what you did or didn't do, or what you'd recommend?
I call it a failure of ambition and a failure of focus. And by a failure of ambition, I mean we were wildly over ambitious in what we felt we could achieve with the resources and time available to us. So instead of focusing on creating one function that was commercially that a farmer would pay you for, we were trying to create the individual cow management system where we created all functions at the same time. Not a good idea. So
very common. Most people, you know, tech-led in particular, would like to put everything in there, and they're afraid that it won't be good enough if they don't. But very often we see the same thing, you know, so people are very forgiving out there, and they like to try things and prove, you know, one or two things at a time. So that's very normal.
And focus, and as you say, feedback is huge on that. Like we're forever indebted to our earliest customer, who's a man called Steve Maddox over in California. Because principally he would tell us exactly what he felt about our offerings as they evolved. And we had a real point, there was a point about a year and a half ago where we had a real moment of realization when we said, Steve, you know, what are you doing with all the alerts we give you? And he went, I'm ignoring them. And we were like, what? That's incredibly valuable information. Why are you ignoring them? And he was like, yeah, I know it's valuable, but I can't do anything about it. So I'm just ignoring it because if I can't do anything about it, I don't want to know about it. So that led to us making a major change where we said, right, from now on, it doesn't matter if the farmer tells you it is valuable in a focus group. If you're sending the farmer the information and you can see that the information is not causing the farmer to respond in a fashion that they have felt offered value to their operation, then you haven't helped them, you've annoyed them. So don't do that anymore. And then we also got in, Aidan Connolly joined as our company CEO from Alltech, and he did an incredible job in getting us to focus on just one thing. And we had what we called our one pen, one barn, one farm strategy, where we would get one thing working in one pen, then we get it working in one barn, then we get it working on one farm, and then we would decide whether it was a commercially scalable product or not. So listening to the farmer and observing their responses in conjunction with the verbal feedback they were giving us, coupled with getting extreme focus on commercial execution, were the main ways that we got from, you know, what I suppose fundamentally started out as a research project to getting something that was commercially valuable to large-scale dairy farmers.
Yeah, and we hear that. So, you know, we work a lot with the investors, and, you know, particularly looking at business opportunities, and they do want to see the size of it. So it's something in terms of a market opportunity that can, you know, go from Ireland to, as you say, California or Canada or anywhere. And that's the first thing an investor wants to see. But, you know, also they want to see that you prove it in a full loop, that you can build something, you can test it, you can push it out there, you can get the feedback, and that you can then also have a business model that makes sense, that the customer wants it and they're willing to pay for you. And even if that loop is quite tight, you know, you've proved all aspects of your business essentially, like you were just saying. And then you can expand it, you know, you can repeat that with a different set of customers or in a different geography and so on. So with guidance, you mentioned Alltech and, you know, the CEO coming in. So where are you at right now, I suppose, in terms of reaching customers in different parts of the world?
So we started doing installs. We obviously had to shut down a bit for COVID-19, but we started doing installs again a week or two ago over in California. So we're currently fully booked up until the end of June with commercially paid installs. So we're like, basically, if we had a larger install team, we'd be doing more right now. So yeah, we're very happy that, and it's one of the things that has been surprising at COVID-19. While it's caused us operational issues, obviously, as it has everyone, it's also demonstrated the increasing value of digital technologies to people through this crisis. Because I mean, anything that enables you to view things remotely and reduce the requirement for labor seems to have increased in value over that period. And we're certainly seeing that in the sales response to what we do. So yeah, we're very busy at the moment is the short answer.
And I guess for people on here who might be in a business or thinking about a business that they want to expand into ag tech, in terms of funding this, how did you go about it in the early stages? Was it self-funded? How did you because there's a capital cost with anything that's hardware, and most of the ag tech things that I see are hardware and software. And you mentioned the hardware was easy, and the software was the more difficult piece here. So maybe talk a little bit about that, and then also the funding behind it.
It's not easy. One of the reasons we're focusing computer vision on an indoor environment is because computer vision doesn't like variability. And so you've less environmental variability with computer vision, but getting like what the buzzword is edge AI processing happening in a remote environment with poor connectivity, that was not easy. So no, hardware is hard, as they say. So the software development was also very difficult, but to say one was harder than the other is probably not correct. And, we remain, as far as we're aware, the only computer vision company in global ag tech that has actually demonstrated that they can scalably execute installs on a commercial basis. So it's the fact that we can do that and no one else seems to be able to do it is a massive source of our current competitive advantage. But yeah, so in terms of getting all of that deployed and getting it funded and everything, we initially started, my brother and I were fortunate enough to make quite a bit of capital early in our careers. So we self-funded the business for the first couple of years. We did a seed funding round of a couple of $100,000 in 2015. Then we got our initial commercial scaling round where we were going from prototype to build a commercial product. We raised a couple of million doing that. And then once we had proved we could go from prototype to something that a farmer would commercially pay for, we then did a large scale finance round, which we ended up doing with Cargill. We had a bunch of venture offers when we did that as well, but we felt like ag tech's a little bit different from other industries in that reputation and trust and all that is very important in the sales process. So for us to get capital from Cargill, who could, one, provide us with validation simply by the act of them investing in us, and secondarily, giving us access to a large amount of global cows and access to extremely knowledgeable dairy nutritionists and dairy scientists to help further improve our product. That was a lot more compelling than any venture offers that we could get. We've also taken a small amount of grant funding, but that would be very small relative to the amount of investment capital that we have raised or equity-based raise.
I think that's an important point as well. So, grant funding is very important. If you are continuing on, though, you may need larger amounts, and with investors, picking the right investor that first of all you gel with, and so the relationship is strong, but also can give you more than just the money. Is really important. That is familiar with the area that you're in, has network and connections, has advice that's in depth. So anybody thinking about that, it's very important to do so. In terms of raising that money, how did you go about it? I mean, were there sort of pitch days? Are there any tips and tricks for people that might be putting their business forward, and areas that you felt the people investing in you wanted to see?
So I had an unfair advantage in that I spent a number of years as a corporate banker. So having been both sides of the finance desk, that was very helpful in how we sought to raise. So one of my understandings is the best way for you to raise capital is your ability to network with people who are seeking to invest in capital. We never really did any pitch days or accelerators or anything like that. We basically, again, self-funded to the point where we could do an impressive proof of concept demo. And then we used that to seek people who were trying to invest in ag tech and network our way to them, and then pitch to them effectively. And I mean, I got introduced to a lot of people through my friends in Singularity University. I already had a network of technology people who I've collaborated with in San Francisco on some RPE projects and other US government stuff. So leveraging contacts through them. And then I also had my own agricultural networks from operating with Comex McKinnon for a number of years. But ironically, when we first did our deal with Cargill actually reached out to us. We already had a number of term sheets for venture deals, and Cargill got in touch on our company webpage and say, hey, we've read about what you're doing. It's very interesting, and we'd like to be in touch with you. So I suppose it's one of those things where you can create serendipity by getting yourself out there and getting your story out there. And, you know, I was fortunate to be on the public speaking circuit a bit through mostly Singularity University, where I would be in front of audiences explaining to them why I believed this was the future of agriculture, why I believed it would be good for the farmer, the environment, and the consumer. And we got a lot of inbound traction through appearing in newspapers. You know, we've been in the New Yorker, we've been in the New York Times, we've been in Bloomberg. So getting in a lot of the international press, getting on international television, that led to a lot of inbound investment opportunity for us as well.
So it sounds like there was quite a bit of capital in the very beginning. So when you say yourself and your brother had invested and self-funded, can you give us an estimate on that? Because I think a lot of people may not have that, and they may not actually have the opportunity or the network. So placing yourself, you know, in Ireland and working off of, you know, a farm or in a rural setting here, networks like that may not exist, and you know, they wouldn't have exposure to all of those different types of people. Give us an idea of what baseline you have, because I think you might be coming off a different baseline maybe than others.
It was a couple of $100,000. And it's one of those things. So one of the things we don't talk about enough in entrepreneurial circles is that most of the successful global entrepreneurs, they either came from wealthy backgrounds or they made their money previously in their career. And the average age of a successful entrepreneur is 45. The media likes to depict youthful founders because they're great stories, but the reality is the average age of a successful founder is about 45, and they mostly come from wealthy backgrounds. If you...
We'd see the same, actually. We'd see a lot of people that are coming and actually would have not maybe been successful necessarily, but, you know, would have worked for a time and then for themselves want to do something. So it's very admirable to see people coming onto the program and stepping out from one place into maybe a tech world where they would have been, you know, working a different type of business. So you're absolutely right. I think even in Ireland, we're definitely looking at people in their 40s and that number's going up actually, which is very nice because these people have an old head rather than trying to put an old head on young shoulders. So it's much easier for us to work with them as well.
Yeah, but I would add that, you know, if you haven't made that personal capital already in your career that you can afford to squander in a foolhardy effort to create a technology company, grants are probably your best access to that. And the ability for you to work through the grant system to get to proof of concept, to enable yourself to be investable at a later point, that is a good pathway. The main trade-off you're making for doing that is time. Obviously, it costs time to do the grant process when you could be, you know, just working and deploying the capital on creating product rather than pursuing grants. And then on a secondary basis, depending on the nature of the grants and the timing and all that sort of thing, you can end up having quite an unhealthy capitalization table when it comes to do your financing round. So when you self-fund, you will always have a healthier cap table when the time comes to do a big round than if you've been seeking investment from the outset, or, and again, depending on the nature of the grants, depending on how you did your grants.
Yeah. So I think I see Aisling popping up, so I'm sensing we're running out of time. And just one quick question, I suppose, plenty of lessons learned in there, I guess, investing your own capital, but at the same time, you know, having to, you know, kind of iterate the product and push it out there, and, you know, realizing pieces of it weren't required. It's a very common story as well. But lots of things in terms of network that you discovered. Main lessons, some people on here, you know, pointers or lessons learned to help people here.
Oh, sorry, you'd like me to give a few pointers?
Yeah.
Well, sorry, the single most important, well, like, first of all, I always like to tell people that being an entrepreneur is an absolutely miserable existence, and it's way worse than having a job. And you should only actually do it if you've an itch that is the only way you can scratch it. You know, it's all encompassing. You've no free time. You're not making any money for a long point in time. So being prepared to go through that hardship, and that mental hardship in particular, that's something that's incredibly important. Secondarily, domain knowledge is key. Like, the best way you can get a competitive advantage is knowing the domain with which you want to solve a problem better than the other people who are attempting to solve that problem. And I always think as well that the best companies start with a problem. Like, my issue when I started Cainthus was, I can see all these inefficiencies in global agriculture that is causing us to use way more land than we should be using, that is fundamentally stemming back to a lack of available information. And that was the itch that I needed to scratch on a personal basis. But if you start with a cool piece of technology looking for a solution, and I mean, drones are probably the best worst examples of that at the moment. Drones are really cool. I've crashed loads of them. They're fun, but they're so much fun that a lot of people are trying to build businesses looking for problems with that cool technology, as opposed to and again with Cainthus, you know, here's this problem with agriculture where we need more digitalization. And, you know, we didn't get into computer vision because it was cool. We got into computer vision because it probably represented the most cost-effective way to get that information to a commercial farmer. So yeah, to boil it down, really make sure you're getting into it for the right reasons. And that reason should not be money, because 99% of startups fail and you're probably not going to make any. And the second one is that deep domain knowledge. And the third one is, know that you are approaching a problem that you want to solve, that you believe will have strong commercial value if you succeed. So those would be the main three ones I would advise people who are thinking about getting into AgTech.
Well, thanks a million. I think you're definitely right. If you're applying to ARC Labs, an NDRC at ARC Labs, we want to see that problem. We want to hear all about that, and that you have a great understanding of it. And of course, you know, if you have domain knowledge, industry knowledge, if you talk to enough potential customers, you should know the problem inside out and the landscape inside out. So absolutely agree with David. And it is a tough path, so we're here to support you. So thanks very much to David for his time, and thanks for the people who've organised here, PACE and ESA, and then Aisling and ARC Labs helping out, and coming back in here to remind everybody of all the bits and pieces. I'll let you finish up.